think of storyboarding as getting the basic structure down, working from the end, and then adding layers on top. So when you've got the basic structure down, you're able to step back, look at what you've got, and then add layers. You've got the basic structure. Now, how about multimedia? If you've got video, where does the video go? Why is it there? What do you need to do to lead up to the video? What follows on from the video? If you want to inject some tips or strategies, where do those go? Why do they go where they go? You can add things like surprise and delight. I think we've talked about value bombs or surprise and delight in storyboarding sessions. You can kind of step back and think, what's missing here? What can I do to make the learners go aha, or adding a bit of personality?
Hi, and welcome back to Adventures in Learning Design, a place to talk about how to design effective learning experiences. My name's Laurie Harrison.
And my name's Tim Gifford.
And we're both co-founders of LearnJam, a learning agency and consultancy. Episode 13, Storyboarding. One of the tools that we use to design online courses is storyboarding. This is one of my favourite processes. Get all of the people together who are going to be developing the course, writers, editors, video producers, subject matter experts, everybody, and work together really intensively to map out visually the flow of the course and use that to identify gaps, opportunities to do interesting things, and to make sure that the whole thing is actually helping learners to achieve their goals. Tim and I spoke to Lucy Williams from the LearnJam team, and we talked about how we use this process, why it works so well, and some tips and ideas for how to do it remotely. So let's get going. Over to Tim.
So we're here to talk about storyboarding, and we're here to talk about storyboarding because it's something we do all the time. And I actually don't think we talk about it enough. So it seemed like a good opportunity to get together and share our experiences of storyboarding learning experiences, because we've all done it at some point, haven't we? So I thought, yeah, let's get together and start talking through what is storyboarding when we talk about it from a learning design perspective, and how do we do it, and how have we used it. So I'm going to throw this question to both of you, and it's top marks for whoever gives me a good answer.
Go for it, Tim.
But what do we mean when we talk about storyboarding? What is it?
So I would say that storyboarding is, for me, it's the best way of starting a content development project. And it's an interactive workshop where a bunch of people work together to co-create the story of a course or learning experience. And it's about the bringing together of lots of different things. So the learning design, the subject matter expertise, the strategy and goals of the particular project, the learners and how they're thinking and feeling, and bringing all of those things together to map out the full experience and to kind of have a view to be able to see the experience in front of us.
Yeah, Lucy, top marks.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Laurie hasn't had a turn yet.
I'm much better.
No, I haven't gone yet, but I concur, Lucy. Yeah, I think that last point you made is a good one and very important. I think there's real value in being able to see the scope of a course mapped out visually. In the good old days when we used to do storyboarding workshops in a room with real people all together, we would aim to,
those times, yeah.
We would fill a wall, and basically that wall would be a visual representation of the structure and the flow and the narrative of the course. And I think that's what makes it such a useful and powerful technique. And the other really important point that you mentioned is like who's involved in creating that storyboard. It's not a learning designer, one or two people, or the content lead. Where the real value comes, I think, is getting the whole team together. So all of the people who are going to be involved in creating that course and co-creating that storyboard and that course narrative together, so that the people who are going to be writing the content are involved in it. The people who are thinking about this from a business or commercial point of view are involved in this process. The people who are going to be doing the video production, all these different roles. And when you're working particularly on a big course development project, it's very easy to kind of work in head down mode, just focusing on the bit of the course that you're responsible for, and not feel any sense of ownership and responsibility for the wider thing, for the whole course that we're trying to develop. And if you've all worked together really intensively to design that course together, that puts the team in a much stronger position, and it creates a better team, I think. So I haven't given a different definition, Tim, but I think I've kind of built on the solid foundations that Lucy laid for us there, maybe.
No, I still prefer Lucy's, Laurie, sorry.
We find that storyboarding is really effective for showing us the big picture of a course early on. Back to Tim for more on that.
Well, I think a big part of it is this idea of vision, isn't it? It's like, what is the vision for this course? Before we go into any platform, or before we go into any content creation mode, it's like, what are we shooting for here? What does this thing look like? How does it do what we need it to do? The reason we arrived at this format, I suppose, is because we took inspiration from how storyboarding is used in film production, for example, where you're trying to map out how the plot line of a film or a story is told through a sequence of shots, snapshots. So before any film is turned over, or before anybody gathers on set, or whatever else happens when you create a film, the production team has a really clear shot-by-shot view of how the vision of that film is going to be realized. And that allows them to see, okay, well, what do we need in terms of scene and setting and actors and camera angles and lighting and, all those dimensions, components are you can work out what needs to happen to realize that vision. And I think that's what we're looking to achieve with the learning design storyboard, wasn't it? It's all of these things: strategy, learner, content, platform, learning objectives. All of these things need to be configured in a way that actually tells a story, first of all, has a clear flow through it, is cogent, and takes a learner through a journey, but also gets to an outcome that we want them to. So that's kind of how we mapped what was happening outside of learning design into our own processes.
Yeah, and thinking of the learner as the hero of the story. So what's the
What's
end result of that journey that they go on? And that's your starting point when you're storyboarding a course. By the end of this course, the learner will be able to do X, Y, and Z, and these are the different steps. This is the path that's going to get them there. And I think, just coming back to talking about movies and stuff, the other thing is that by creating a storyboard fairly early in the process, that tells you whether it's working before you've invested all your money in the production. You can see it, and it becomes obvious when there are holes in the plot, or hang on, we had this character who was really important and suddenly we haven't seen them again, what's going on? And just sketching out a sequence of steps can reveal that kind of stuff. And I think it's the same in a course. You've defined your end point, and then you've visually sort of mapped out all of the steps, and if you've got all these people in the room working on this together, people are going to spot when things aren't working and when there's holes in the plot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good way of getting a shared understanding of the project or learning experience as a whole, and it's super efficient as well. It's really complex to put together a really great course, learning experience, module, whatever, and this is a way of embracing that complexity rather than simplifying. We can see the full picture of how everything works together, what the connections are, how the learner meets their goals, how the content relates to the overall vision and strategy, and all of the other things in between. It makes content creation, course creation, a lot quicker as a result, I think.
One of the key outcomes, isn't it, is everybody's sharing that vision and contributing to it. It makes the actual production so much easier to manage. Everything's laid out. You've got the recipe, you've got the shot-by-shot play of what you're trying to do. Then it's just a matter of, okay, what do we need to create to do this particular part of that journey? It saves so much time. And actually, the process, I think, is a great deal of fun as well. Having in the same room content creators, learning designers, subject matter experts, all these different brains who have a different perspective on what this learning journey can and should do, it's a really sparky process. You kind of start, you start vibing off each other and start seeing how things can be made better and more creative and all that sort of thing. So it's a really great process to go through.
Okay, that sounds great, but how does it actually work?
Let's start thinking about the process a little bit. Like, what actually happens? What do we do when we do what we do? So let's start at the beginning. Like, what do we bring to a storyboarding session before we post it to whiteboard or however it is we do it? Like, what are the inputs? What are we bringing to that conversation to kick it off?
Not just Post-it notes and Sharpies. What are all of the more important things? Yeah,
I mean, those are critical tools.
Biscuits, yeah.
I suppose another way of asking, like, what do we need to know to start a storyboarding session?
I think it's the different perspectives. Like, who are the players in this process? We've said before, we've got learning designers, so the people who are there kind of advocating for the pedagogy and the design of the course. You've got subject matter experts or writers, the people who are there who really care about the content and the detail of the content and have a really deep understanding of the subject matter and what the learners need to know. You've got the learners themselves. We usually bring learners into storyboarding sessions in persona form and have people who are in the storyboarding kind of advocating for different learners in that storyboarding session, so representing the voice of the learner. The vision and strategy, that perspective needs to come into the storyboarding as well. Like, where does this learning experience fit or sit in the vision and strategy of the creators of the course? Is everyone on board with that vision, and are the kind of main stakeholders comfortable that the course is going to deliver the vision?
I think those are the main stakeholders, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because those are all the main bases covered: learner, strategy, content. And we also go in, I suppose, sometimes with, okay, we know that the course needs to be about X. Like, it's this thing. It's about a certain communication skill, or it's about a particular knowledge point, or sort of a knowledge around whether it's language or a process, whatever it is. But we know that this storyboard, this course, needs to help a learner achieve capabilities in this skill or this knowledge area or this behavior, whatever it is. And then it's a matter of, through the course of that process, working out how we get there. We've got the strategy learning designer, we've got the content creators, we've got this idea of what the course needs to do and how it's kind of positioned, I suppose, within the wider context of like the organization's strategic goals and learning goals. How do we then start storyboarding it out? What do we need to get out of that conversation? How do those brains in the room interact that allow us to expose and arrange the critical parts of that course?
Yeah, I might just step back a bit, because I actually think that storyboarding session could happen at different levels. So I think we've all done storyboarding sessions that are about the big picture of the learning experience. So when you're conceptualizing the learning experience in the first place, what are the different modes and interactions that will be part of that experience, and mapping out how they function as a whole. So deciding the order of the things, how do they come together as a course or as a module? If you've got a course, how many bits is it made up of? What are those bits, and what order do they come in? So helping you decide the order that's best for your learners. So for example, if you've got peer learning or collaboration as one of your modes of interaction, would that happen before or after a live class, or before or after some self-study or whatever? So mapping out the big picture of the learning experience, and then zooming into the detail. So recently we've been really zoomed in to module level storyboarding. So we've recently held 20 storyboarding sessions for 20 modules for each module of a course. And that was kind of really zoomed in to the detail.
Next, Lucy gave us some more concrete detail about how she'd been using the process on a recent project. This is an Erasmus Plus project to develop a training programme to help teachers in mainstream secondary schools all over Europe to better recognise and support special educational needs in their classrooms, particularly with a focus on enabling inclusive teaching and learning.
Yeah, so Lucy, you mentioned we've done this quite a lot recently. And you've just completed a whole programme of storyboards on a project recently. Can you talk us through like the process you went through in those? Like, how did you sort of set up that storyboard and how did you take the team through it to a point where you had something that you could start building on top of, I suppose?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting project. We kind of did our storyboarding sessions in two halves. The team involved in the storyboarding, so there was us at LearnJam, so representing learning design, and we had subject matter experts in SEN, special educational needs, and we had a team of writers who were responsible for bringing all of the content together and producing the modules. So in the first step, we got together, so we, the learning designers, got together with subject matter experts and kind of had almost like a structured interview with the subject matter experts where we talked about the vision of each module. What is this module? Why does it exist? What's its reason for being? What are the learning outcomes? What do we want the learners to achieve? What's the kind of the main content or theory that we want to get across? And how does that break down? Can we break it down into like 3 key points, for example? And we asked questions like, who is this module for? Might sound like a really obvious question to ask, but when you dig into the detail, you can really think about why is the learner doing this module? If we're looking at a set of 20 modules, which we were in this project, why are they doing this one? What's their past experience? What might they already know about this particular subject area? And we were asking other questions like, how might they be feeling? How might the learner be feeling at the beginning of this module? So we had things that came out there like they might be feeling really frustrated and guilty and quite anxious before this module. And then how do we want to leave them feeling by the end of it? Things that would come out there would be things like optimistic, more aware of limiting beliefs, motivated to take action. And so we went through that structured questioning process with the subject matter experts to kind of extract all of the detail and get it into some kind of order. And then in this second part of the storyboarding, we brought in the writers as well. So we had quite a big group for each storyboarding session. So we had learning designers, subject matter experts, and the writers, and we would sense check that vision. So we'd go through together the same questions. We'd look at the key points that we'd identified with the subject matter expert. Did those make sense to everyone? How does that feel now that we've slept on it for a few days? Does it make sense? Does it make sense to fresh pair of eyes? Are we all happy and in agreement on what this module needs to be, why it's there, how it functions as part of the set of 20? So reaching that shared understanding as a group and then taking all of that vision to the next level and beginning to map out the module in detail.
Lucy then talked about how she used a tool called Mural, which is an online collaboration tool, like a whiteboard with post-its that people can work on together in real time. And we use it a lot for remote workshops.
We've done some learning design thinking about the different steps and stages involved in the module beforehand. And we worked in Mural with virtual post-it notes. And we had a kind of a space in Mural for each of the steps involved in the module. So just to give you an example of the steps, we had step 1, the kind of opening questions, opening powerful questions and prompts. Step 2 is an inspiring, thought-provoking story. Step 3 is the information and theory. And then step 4 was practice or apply.
Had you established that framework beforehand? Those stages had already,
Yeah.
Pre the SME sort of discussion, had already thought, okay, this is how the course fundamentally works. Yeah,
exactly. So we'd actually done, I think probably one of the last in-person storyboarding sessions that we did as LearnJam to map out that whole bigger picture learning design. So we mapped out the 20 modules themselves, and then the kind of the high level learning design and the structure. We did that in Ericeira in Portugal. Again with
not bad.
a group of people representing learning design, subject matter expertise, and writing teams. And so we already had that structure. So this is the lower level storyboarding. And so we had the 4-step structure, and we had, from the storyboarding part 1 discussion with the subject matter experts, we had the kind of vision for the course and the answers to those questions, like who is this module for, and how are they feeling, how do we want to leave them feeling, and what the key points were. And then we needed to bring that forward and work out how that vision breaks down into those 4 steps and how those 4 steps hang together.
One of our key principles with storyboarding is to start from the end and then work forward towards that. Lucy explains more.
We never started with step 1. We'd always jump in at step 3 or step 4. So one of the things I think we do often, and we've learned through doing so many storyboarding sessions, is start at the end and work backwards from there. So if you can get the end bit right, where are we aiming for the learners to go? What do they need to achieve by the end of this module, and how are they going to achieve it? Then we can work back towards that. And so we start at step 3 or step 4, get that right, and then at every stage in the process, we can ask ourselves, like, how does this build towards that final step?
I think that's kind of critical to the way this process works, really, isn't it? I think that's what we would always try and do, is define the final step, a task that the learner has to do at the end of the module. Let's define that and sort of define what do we need to be able to see the learner showing they can do, the skill that they can demonstrate, and then work back from there, rather than jumping in, let's start at step 1 and work forward, because obviously the risk of doing that is that you end up in a completely different place than where you wanted to get them to. So sometimes it feels a bit counterintuitive to try and define in a bit more detail what the end goal is, and maybe even define a culminating activity or task, and then work towards that. But I think that, for me, that's the real key to this whole process, is doing it in that order.
Yeah, absolutely. You either end up in a completely different place or run the storyboarding twice, because you have to kind of unpick everything that you've done when you get to that end point and realise that you're not working towards it in the way that you need to.
We generally work through a storyboard in various passes. So we start with the big picture and then gradually fill in more and more of the small details.
I think of storyboarding as getting the basic structure down, working from the end, and then adding layers on top. Yeah. So when you've got the basic structure down, you're able to kind of step back, look at what you've got, and then add layers. So things like, you've got the basic structure. Now, how about multimedia? If you've got video, where does the video go? Why is it there? What do you need to do to lead up to the video? What follows on from the video? If you want to inject some tips or strategies, where do those go and why? Why do they go where they go? You can add things like surprise and delight. I think we've talked about value bombs or surprise and delight in storyboarding sessions. You can kind of step back and think, what's missing here? What can I do to kind of make the learners go, aha, or that's nice, or just adding a bit of personality into the content. You can stand back and see where you might have too much or not enough, and where there might be gaps in the flow of the experience.
I love that idea of layering things on, getting the structure, the framework in place, and then getting the first pass of, like, this is where we want to get you, this is how we get you there. We can see the journey. Now let's just start adding detail onto that, and like just continuing to build up on that. And that, yeah, is a really useful and like efficient way of doing it as well. Like, you're not sort of like continually moving things around or trying to get things to match. You're adding and sort of like seeing how those additions work with each other, and also with the base layers, I suppose, between them. Yeah, and I love the value bomb as well. There's always opportunity to add some value bombs in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's sort of like there's high notes of like unexpected delight that just lift the whole experience. Yeah.
Having your course mapped out as a storyboard can reveal opportunities, ways to add more depth to your course, or to get learners thinking in different ways.
There are other things you can do as well that could be specific to a particular course. So in the SEN course that we've just been talking about, one of the things that we thought it was really important to do was to help enable a mindset shift as part of the course. In order to do that, we wanted to give in each module something to worry or care about. Like why should they care about this module? Something to give them hope, and then something to raise awareness of their own kind of responsibility or role in making this happen. So the learners in this particular case were SEN teachers in mainstream schools in Europe. So those three things: something for them to worry about, something to give them hope, and something to raise awareness of their responsibility or role. They were things that we could step back and see, like, where's the best place to do this and how can we do this? So kind of layering other things like that in as well. You end up kind of crowbarring those things in if you're planning an experience in a more linear way, whereas storyboarding for me really helps kind of see where the best opportunities are to add in things like that.
You can also use your storyboard to look at your course from different angles and in different levels of detail.
And also, like, storyboarding also gives you that view across modules, across courses, doesn't it? So you can kind of see, you know, how did we do that awareness raising on other courses?
Yeah.
You know, do we want to bring that back in, or do we want to like avoid duplicating that too much? Or like, how did we present video elsewhere? Let's kind of look back to that. So it kind of gives you that really nice, like, you can step right back and see how this whole program fits together, rather than sort of looking at each interaction or each lesson sort of through the keyhole. You get a better view, or at least it allows you to zoom in and out as you need to, really effectively.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Tim. And I think that sort of constant zooming in and out, big picture, and then back into the detail is really important. And it's a thing that is easy to kind of to lose sight of. Depending on your role, you tend to live in one or other space. You're looking at a course from the big picture point of view, or particularly if your role is content focused, you tend to get very focused on the detail. I think this process is really good for enabling you to zoom in and out. You've got that overview, that visual overview that you're sharing and co-creating. But within that, you can zoom in and start to build out more detail.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things that makes it, I think, such an important process and so efficient, is that shared understanding and appreciation of the different levels of expertise that go into making a course like this. So if your role is always thinking about the high level, sometimes it's difficult to understand why some of the detail is there. And if your role is to think about the detail, sometimes it's difficult to understand decisions that are made from a big picture point of view. And so everyone involved in this gets a real understanding and appreciation of what we all bring to the party and why each bit is important. And I think it helps you feel heard, whatever your role in the project is. And that sense of shared belonging and ownership makes for a better project in general as well. So it's a really lovely way of starting a working process.
100% agree. It makes for a better project team, in my experience. You get a much more sort of close-knit, high-functioning team where everyone is pulling in the same direction. Next, I wondered if Lucy had any tips for running storyboarding sessions remotely. The question I've got is, with storyboarding sessions that I've been involved in, most of them were pre-COVID, so they were in person, high energy, intensive. Some of them we hired an Airbnb for 2 days and got the whole team together, and made an experience of it.
Yes.
It wasn't just like, this is a work meeting, this is an event almost. And I think that worked quite well in terms of sort of getting that team atmosphere, getting that shared experience and that shared buy-in and excitement about the course. Lucy, you've done a ton of storyboarding sessions now virtually. What would be your key takeaways or advice if you're not able to be in a room with someone with post-its and putting stuff on a wall and moving around and having that sort of close interaction? What are some of the big differences, and what would be your top tips?
I mean, I think I mentioned before that we did storyboarding in 2 halves for this particular project. And I think that was one big difference. It's an intense process. And when you're in person, you can have those moments where you get a bit of downtime as well. There's something about the energy of being in a room together. We were always exhausted at the end of the day, but there's something about that energy that really creates momentum. So first of all, I think we wanted to split the storyboarding down into 2 sessions. So these were two-hour sessions. Mm-hmm. So it's an intense process. Doing it in bursts like that was better than doing it all in one go. I don't think we would have been able to make it to the end if we were doing 4-hour sessions. Using a shared mural board, like Mural was our best friend in these virtual storyboarding sessions. Everyone having the link, understanding how to use Mural beforehand, and everyone being able to get into Mural and to co-create. I found this is a really practical thing, but for me, facilitating these sessions, it was super important to have 2 screens. Maybe 3, but there's kind of a lot that you have to hold together. I mean, if you remember in some of those physical storyboarding sessions, we had like meters of wall covered in post-it notes, and sometimes more than one wall, and then we had stuff spread out on the table and all sorts of things. It's kind of, how can you recreate that space and help everyone see all of the bits that they need to see at once? There's something that's really important about being able to see it. So making sure you think about that and understand what everyone else's setup is. We do this stuff all the time. We're all working on a couple of screens. We use Mural all the time, but making sure that everyone's comfortable doing that and that everyone has the right setup, or understanding what setup people do have and then working with that. Breaks, remembering to have breaks. I think sleeping on it between parts 1 and 2 is a really good thing. I think we use that kind of break a lot of the time to kind of let stuff sit, and we might end session 1 with a kind of tricky problem we needed to solve, and often we'd come back the next day and someone has solved it overnight just through thinking about it and reflecting on it.
I think that's a really important thing to call out as well, is, like you say, like these can be quite sort of like intense, like creatively intense sessions. And I think the key is knowing, when's a good time just to take a break and step away. It's like, we've got to a point, this is a really sticky problem, let's go for a walk. Let's come back tomorrow. Let's just have a cup of tea, come back in 15 minutes, whatever it is. Let's just step away from this and just think about something else, or let ideas percolate. Of course, the whole process is trying to get us to a point that we can then put it into production and kind of take the content development forward. But it shouldn't be at the expense of burnout or frustration, or just pushing through regardless. I think this is kind of where the facilitator kind of is important. It's like knowing when just to take a break. Okay, ideas aren't getting us anywhere, let's step away, come back at it later, fresh heads, all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, I really enjoy the whole storyboarding process. I think for me, it's like the clearest expression of when learning designers are doing learning design.
Yeah.
It's in those conversations and questions and idea generation. That's our element, I think. You couldn't really capture a better example of that. So yeah, I really love it. And whether it's in an Airbnb or in a mural board, I just find them really fun. Because,
yeah, me too.
You've got an idea of what the course needs to do, but you're not really clear yet on how it's going to do that. But let's discover that together. And that's the exciting thing. We're discovering this course.
Yeah, it's a really creative process.
Learning design as a voyage of discovery. If you'd like to find out more about how we do storyboarding and to get some resources, just go to learnjam.com/storyboarding. Adventures in Learning Design was brought to you by LearnJam.
To learn more about what we do and who we do it for, and to download your own free copy of our learning design principles, head over to learnjam.com.